we can get started, and then people will be joining as we go. Also, this session is being recorded, so it will be out there for others who couldn't make it here to access it. So thanks everyone for joining. This is one of the ACL mentorship sessions. We've been doing this for more than a year now. And we keep hearing from students at conferences and outside conferences how useful they find them, which really is what keeps us going on the organization side. So aside from Zhijing and myself in the organization, we've been also working with other people, Vinod, Mohit, Ash, Abhay, Tehas. We had other organizers in the past. And the goal for today's session is to talk about something that's maybe on people's minds, applying for PhDs in natural language processing. The goal for these sessions is really to be informal, so really get to answer your questions. And we'll start with some introductions and then we'll go straight to questions. All right, so we have some really great panelists here covering different perspectives, different experiences. We have Georgiana Ifrim from USD in Ireland. We have Zhang from Penn State in US. And they will be covering the faculty perspective and obviously also former student. We've all been students at some point. And also both Europe and US with respect to what's looked for in these applications. And then we also have Zhijing, who is still a PhD student, but eventually she did go through a successful PhD application process. So she will have that perspective as well. And she's at MPI and ETH in Europe as well. So I will start with the panelists and ask them to introduce themselves very briefly about their research interest and maybe also briefly about your experience with the PhD application process from either side, either as a student or as a faculty, for those of you who would qualify for that perspective. So Georgiana, I will start with you.
Sure. So just a bit of intro for myself. I'm an associate professor in computer science at University College Dublin in Ireland. I joined as faculty in 2015, so I've been 7 years in this job. And I think the big change for me was going from the postdoc experience to the faculty experience, where you're kind of going from a research focus to juggling multiple things. So that was a big culture shock. But after a year or two, you kind of find your footing, hopefully. Before that, I did a couple of postdocs. So I started quite a bit back, trying to remember the year now, but I finished my undergrad in Bucharest, Romania, in computer science in 2003. And around that time, I started to have an awareness. There wasn't so much awareness of research. I think this has changed a lot, but I started hearing about summer schools and I applied for a couple of summer schools. I applied for a couple of scholarships and I was fortunate to get a scholarship for Max Planck Institute for Informatics in Saarbrücken in Germany. So I was just talking to Zhijing. She's at another MPI in Germany. So I got the scholarship for master's there and I continue on with a PhD. So I spent about 5 years in Germany. And after that, I moved for a couple of postdocs and I eventually ended up in Dublin, Ireland, more for personal reasons than anything else. And thankfully, I managed to build a career here in machine learning. For my PhD, I worked on text classification. So I was interested in kind of latent models and also working with large feature spaces. Afterwards, I moved more towards sequence learning, DNA data. And eventually, I kind of joined the NLP area with time series. So that's where I am right now. So I'm still working in NLP in summarization, but I've started working in other areas as well, because you can actually take lots of ideas from NLP to other research areas. So that's me.
Right, thank you. Zhijing, do you want to go next?
That's great. Hi, everyone. I'm currently a PhD. When I applied I work on causal NLP and also NLP for social good. And I guess I do have a fresh experience of applying to PhDs. when I applied for that, it was like really competitive. You see like a crazy number of applications going into every school. And I tried different countries as well. So there could be lots to share today. Yep.
All right, thank you, Andrew.
Hey everyone, my name is Ray, and now I'm an assistant professor at Penn State University. But I just began this job like in 2020, so I still have very fresh mind about how to apply for PhD and my student research experience. Actually, I started my junior as undergrad at University of Michigan, so that's where I met Rada and also my advisor Drago, and then I graduate and I became a PhD student there. So I started my PhD at Michigan and then moved to Yale to finish my PhD. So my research experience is focused on several things, including semantic parsing, summarization, and also recently I became really interested in efficient NLP methods. So we can have some models that can use less data or less training time or smaller model size to accomplish different NLP tasks, right? So that is that is about me. Yeah, so look forward to discuss PhD applications. If you have any questions, yes, please.
All right, well, thank you. So since you all mentioned the PhD application process, I wanted to have just a follow-up on that introduction to ask, what do you think are some considerations to make when deciding where to apply? Whoever wants to go first.
I'll let Zhijing and Rui go first because they have this fresh in mind, and then I can opt in.
Okay, so maybe I'll speak think aloud. I think the PhD choice, depending on your source country and whether you care about a long-term plan to immigrate to another country. So sometimes visa could be a big issue. I know that US is specifically like strict on visa if you are from certain countries and do want to work on certain areas. I personally choose Germany because it's relatively safe for visa process and not only about the visa approval, but also the length of the visa. If I choose US, then every year when I travel to conferences, I have to go back to China, wait for my another US visa, which is 1 year long every time. The other things could be like the environment, but the environment could be regardless of the countries. Like if you find a really vibrant research environment, then like that's definitely the priority concern. The other thing could be that for your own long-term plan, because during your PhD, you are spending the best years where you have good health, less worry from other things, like in a certain place. Like you really want to have a place where you can, that you'll be happy there, and then maybe your following life trajectory could be based on that place in some ways. Yeah, but these are just some first thoughts. Feel free to voice out some others.
Yeah, I think when we think about where to apply for PhD, it can be a function of like several factors, right? So we want to consider several factors, and for each factor, maybe we have our own weights, right? So maybe I consider this factor most, maybe the other factors are less important for me. I think as Zhijing mentioned, location is definitely a factor because you will spend probably at least 5 years in that location, and that really determines how is your life, and sometimes how you whether you are happy there really is important for your productivity as well. So you want to be a place where you feel happy, you feel good about your work-life balance, you feel good about the weather, and so on. So I think location is definitely one of the factors. I think another factor is about not the university, is where your favorite advisor is, right? So applying for PhD is actually applying for advisors, right? So I think when you think about where to apply, you could start with who are you going to work with, right? So who are the advisors you like most about their work and their publications? I think that's the most important factors, right? So sometimes a good advisor does not have to be in a very prestigious school, right? So maybe there are some advisors you really like, and you should apply there definitely. Right, so I think an advisor is, I think, the most important factor there, and also rankings. So sometimes, everyone is talking about ranking. So sometimes ranking is not very important because PhD is really about doing research with your advisor. But if you think about future, when you apply for jobs, especially when you apply for faculty jobs, they will check your, school, right? So they will say, okay, if you graduate from these top universities, we should, consider you seriously. So that is definitely another factor we should look at. I think another factor is the diversity, right? So you do not want to apply only top schools because, you want to have your safety schools. So you want to have diversity rankings about all the applications you want to submit, so you can have different choices and different chances at different places. Right. So yeah, that is my thought about where to apply. Yeah, thanks.
Very comprehensive. Thank you. Georgiana, did you have something to add?
Yeah, this is very thoughtful. So I have similar constraints, right? So when I considered where to apply, location, I didn't want to go to US because it was hard to see my family. So staying in Europe made more sense for me, and I applied to Germany, to Italy, a couple of other places, simply because my parents would have needed visa and it would have been just hard to manage that. But right next after location, funding was extremely important. I couldn't support my studies, so I needed funding. I needed a scholarship. So that was a consideration. Do I get financial support? What type of financial support? Can I do teaching? What is the environment there? So a scholarship was very important for me. Third, the research environment, and Max Planck was quite famous, so it has this kind of elite label, and there's lots of Nobel Prize and Turing awardees. So, thinking about the future, one is kind of the promise of a good research environment, but another one is kind of long-term impact, where you're trying to, indeed, if you're applying and you're one CV in a sea of many other CVs, I think that kind of the credibility aspect counts. So that's kind of the excellence or the ranking aspect. So this was the same for me, but I think two things I can add, because the other two panelists mentioned all of this. One is, I didn't realize when I was applying that there are different types of funding. So for example, at Max Planck, I was quite fortunate to be able to do blue sky research. I didn't have to work with a company or worry about intellectual property or worry about, very applied sort of work and kind of regular deliverables, managing multiple stakeholders. So these are all fine if you're interested in that, but at least you should be aware of, what is the funding involving? Can you do basic research? Do you have a lot of freedom? Is it very constrained? What kind of deliverables are there? Because this is a practical aspect, and this will impact a lot your experience when you do the PhD. Of course, your advisor or supervisor, advisor, whatever they are called, that's another aspect. Probably I wasn't so aware, just getting an idea about how do they work? Do they meet their students regularly? How regularly? How much input? How much control? People have very different working styles. Even the idea of meeting some of the students with the same advisor, if that's possible, if you have that option, you can always reach out to people. You can send an email and have a chat, over Zoom. Now it's even easier. I think it's a good idea first to figure out what type of funding you have, and next to figure out kind of how does your future advisor work? You know, what is their style? Are you happy with their style? Do you want a lot of freedom? Do you want micromanagement? People have very different styles. And you get a good feel for that by talking with students of the same advisor or postdocs. So I highly advise that. And another thing I'd advise, if you apply and you're not sure about certain aspects of the application, send an email. There's usually a contact person for the applications. They are happy to answer questions rather than being confused or not being sure what should go or not go in your application. Send an email, and the worst that can happen is you don't get a reply, but the best is that you get clarification and you tailor your application better. So that's what I'd like to add.
All right, so that was really comprehensive. From my side, the part that I would like to emphasize, which was mentioned, is really looking for the people you would work with as opposed to the place, because it's a long time, and eventually it's not even just like a 4 to 5 year engagement. It's really a lifetime engagement. You would want to have a good relation with your advisor for a lifetime. And easier said than done. I mean, how would you even know who are those great people? But trying to optimize for finding a good advisor as opposed to a top place, I think it's a better strategy. So for those of you who came in late, I'm putting again the link here to ask questions. So I will start getting questions from those asked by you, and you can also vote for the questions that are of higher interest to you. So one question is how to prove the research potential in the PhD application. We hear often that, well, you should have publications. Personally, I don't necessarily agree with that. But just generally, what are your thoughts on how to show research potential, even outside publications?
I can jump in, or?
Okay, yeah, please go ahead.
So I actually thought a lot about this when I started recruiting students, and I was kind of trying to think about what are the things that need to be there or I need to be looking for. And I actually made the list for myself. I'm very happy to share that list. And one of them is technical skills and kind of research experience. So basically, if you don't have publications, I'd like to see a thesis, a research thesis, whether it's an undergraduate or ideally a master's. I highly advise people to do a master's before they jump into PhD, because it's a taster for what's coming. If you hate the research master's experience, it's unlikely you'll enjoy the PhD, or at least you know what's coming. So at least you're prepared for that. So if you don't have publications, any sorts of research thesis you can share, can you confidently talk about it? Can you present the key contributions, the key challenges you had? How did you go about the challenges? You know, how did you come up with the ideas? Was it in conversation with the advisor? You read something connected, just to give that narrative and that context. Other than that, open source projects, if you contributed to an open source project, or if you did an internship or you had an interesting research experience, that also helps. So yeah, that's what I have there.
Anything else to add, Zhijing or Rui?
Yeah, I can probably go next. I think research is about breadth, right? So I received a lot of emails from potential applicants. And so, but one thing I noticed from those emails is that they want to show so many things that they have done, right? So they have done so many projects, maybe some publications, blah, blah, blah. But I don't think that's a really good demonstration of research potential, because you know, when you go to PhD, the advisor don't expect you to work on so many things, but rather a PhD is about research in a particular topic, but with great depth, right? So I think a good demonstration of research potential is to communicate how you approach a problem, right? So for example, if you are interested in this particular project in this lab, and how you understand this problem. So what publications have been made in this area, and what research problem you see from those publications, and what is the research gap you want to work on, right? So, and then you want to think about some potential solutions and try to draft some research plan if you really want to work on this problem, right? I think that's a good research potential, because in this way, you can show that you have a plan and you can also communicate your plan. So also, research is about communication, and a good communication is also a very important part of your research potential. Yeah, so yeah, that is my some points I want to make here. Yeah.
Yeah, I really like all the points that Ray and Georgiana has made. If I were to say it, it would be like similar, but the more direct cause is if the professor looks at your profile and try to imagine how it would be like to work with you through the PhD, then how enjoyable they would be during that process. And some factors that could contribute to that, as people have mentioned, there could be some hard requirements that is showing up in your application material. It could be previous CS experience, the number of papers, but as some replaceable factors, it could also be a recommendation letter where the professor or the scientist who recommend you shows how you do your research with them. And also, like as Ray mentioned, it could be how you write about your research. Sometimes people also write blogs to show their writing skills. Or you could also directly reach out to professors at the NLP conferences. It's more about like showing yourself through various possible ways so that the professor would imagine a nice PhD together with you.
These are all very good points. There's another question about recommendation letters, and Zhijing mentioned, I think that's a good way to show, which is somehow outside your reach, because there is only that much that you can do about recommendation letters. But essentially, working with people who can speak on your behalf, that can be one way of showing research strength. And that doesn't mean a publication. It really just means somebody who's enjoyed the collaboration with you without necessarily having like a paper coming out of it. It could be like a class project or maybe some other ways of collaborating. And there is a question about some good templates. If a recommender asks you to draft the recommendation letter, I personally feel kind of uncomfortable talking about that because I don't think it's fair for you to write your own letter. So I'd rather not have it addressed. I think ideally, and I realize that you are really put in a situation that maybe you don't even have a way out. But I think one way to approach it is that you could provide things that you really like a description of your project, like really provide material for the letter. And to be honest, I do ask students that I write letters for. I ask for their CV. I ask if they have like project descriptions. I ask what is that they are most excited about from among the things they've done. So I can actually reflect that in my letter. But I do eventually write the letter myself because I think that's the fair thing to do. So, and maybe that's also the reason why there aren't really drafts out there or templates, because that's not a thing that's being done. So acknowledging that it's a hard situation to be put in, I think you can provide a CV and some information about the project you worked on, like a description, and they can use that for the letter. So another question, which is related, is the statement of purpose. So in the application, what should be included? What are professors looking for in the statement of purpose? And the question also goes on to give examples of either being highly technical or being more like a narrative. So any thoughts that any of you have on what would be in a statement of purpose, in a strong statement of purpose?
Maybe I can start. There's probably, I don't know if there's different expectation in the US versus Europe. I'm co-director for a center where we do central recruitment for PhD students, and we have a motivation section. And basically, it's a bit like the statement of purpose, I guess. And one thing you want to read there, or at least one thing I try to understand when I read it, is who are you really? And just get a feel for you, the person, the technical interests, but you know, there can be a generic kind of statement of purpose or motivation where it's like, I always wanted to do a PhD and it's fantastic and I'm going to, you know, spend time in academia and invent new things. The other side of it is to try to be a bit specific. You know, how did your interest in research come about? What kind of topics excite you, or what you know, what give you that that sort of buzz that you want to work on this and you want to dig deeper? And why are you applying to this group? You know, showing that you did a little bit of homework. That question of why this advisor, why this group, why this program? You know, have you done a little bit of homework about the specifics? Again, because PhD can be, you know, a very lonely experience, just one student, one advisor, or it can be a group. There are some type of PhD training. In this center, Emma Labs, we have cohort PhDs. So now there is a class of students starting at the same time. So just doing a little bit of homework and trying to understand the context for the funding and the program you're applying for. I think that really helps. And also if you can give a little bit about who are you, you know, what drives you. I think that is quite important.
Anything else to add? And we don't have to have necessarily everyone answering every question, but if you have something to add, please do.
Yeah, I think I can add something. I think when think about state on purpose, you should put this in the context of other materials, right? So you have your CV, you have your transcript, you have letter of recommendation, and then you have the state on purpose, right? So you should think about what some information you should put in this, which cannot be shown elsewhere, right? So it's not a reputation of what you have done and where you are, because they are already in your CV or other materials. So I think this is really important, because when I check several statements of purpose, I think it's not really a statement of purpose, right? It's a statement of your experience or a statement of your achievements. So this is not what we are looking for in a state on purpose. Rather, I think it is good to demonstrate why you should choose this program, because that's your purpose, right? So, and you should say, okay, I have done such thing as my qualifications, but I choose this program because I like this kind of research. I know what I'm trying to do. I want to achieve such research projects. And I think this lab is a perfect fit for me, right? So, and then you demonstrate this is your purpose of applying for this school. And you're trying to connect yourself to this advisor or to this lab or to this program. I think that's really important. You want to demonstrate something else beyond just the CV or experience or your publications, basically. Yeah, that's my point for statement of purpose. Yeah.
I'll move on to the next question. I will add just a couple of things. One is that there is also stuff that goes, which is beyond the content. For instance, when I read statements of purpose, I also pay attention to little things that you would say, well, who cares? Like whether they are misspellings, like how much attention people do actually pay to that. If you don't have attention to detail, chances are you will have a trouble during a PhD. And those are really things that are very easy to care for. And it's not about English. I'm myself a non-native English speaker. It's really just about how much you care about what you put out there. So if you have lots of mistakes, then chances are that will be judged against you. And then the other thing is, as any other work you do, you can seek feedback. So for instance, other people who have gone through this process before that can provide very useful feedback. So don't be afraid to ask. I'm pretty sure many people would be happy to to help out, and just ask them. I mean, just make sure you give them enough time. So share a draft. Don't ask them for feedback by the end of the day. Give them a few days or more if possible, and you will get very useful feedback. So that's something else to consider. Zhijing?
Yeah, I really love the suggestions we get so far. One additional point to add is that thinking on race direction, what is not reflected by your CV and recommendation letters might be a little bit more about your background, especially because of the diversity of the audience today. Like not everyone starts from the same line. Like maybe in your original university, there wasn't even one single NLP professor, but then how did you work out your way here? Or it could also be your demographic background and so on. Maybe sharing these more, and then the professors can take all of these into holistic account. Yep.
All right, thank you. So this is very, very useful. And we can move on to two related questions about finding an advisor. So first, I imagine is following up the conversation we had earlier, like how finding the right advisor is very important in the application process. So there is a question about what would be a good way of finding potential advisors. And then there is another related question, specifically talking about assistant professors, how risky it is to work with assistant professor. We have here on the call a risky assistant professor, so we can hear from him. But maybe I would generalize from there, like when looking for potential advisors, what are some considerations to make between, say, junior professors versus more senior professors? Or yet another related question, like single advisors versus co-advisors. So any thoughts you have on that?
Yeah, I think I can start, but I will start with the benefits of working with assistant professors. I think there are several benefits. The first is, I think assistant professor, they just graduated, so they are more energetic. They know more about the frontier research topics, and they even have, coding experience that can help you with very hands-on advice, right? So I think that's the benefit of working with assistant professor. But here I can see the question is about, some downsides of working with assistant professor. I do think sometimes assistant professors can be more ambitious. So maybe they are too demanding. They are also, rookies in becoming a professor. Maybe they have some too heavy workload for you. I think you should communicate with this with your advisor if you do find out this is an issue. And second, there is also a mention about what are the odds that an assistant professor run out of funds. Okay, I think it depends on the schools, right? So sometimes if the assistant professor doesn't have a RH position for you, they can provide some teaching assistant position, which is also good. Or there is also a related question about, co-advising, right? So sometimes you can find assistant professor and also a more senior professor who can provide funds, right? So I also have students who work with me, but also he is in charge of another funding project, which is funded, right? So he can work on his research ideas, but also he can also have some other funded project, right? So yeah, there are many ways to work out, but I don't think that's the most important thing. So the most important thing is you should think about if your research aligns well with this assistant professor and whether he or she is helpful for your research goals, right? So I think that's very important. The funding thing, there is some way to work out, right? So yeah, that's my advice here. Yeah.
Yeah, if you wanted to go ahead, Georgiana.
Yeah. So to the question about the risk and funding, I'm used to. So at least in my department, you cannot take on a PhD unless you have the funding. so there is no risk of not having the funding. In terms of what changed for me, I think when I started as assistant professor, I think I was kind of micromanaging my students, and over time I learned to trust more my students and give them more freedom and ask more, what do you think, rather than saying, what do I think? So I think that's what changed for me. But basically it's the personality, I think, that matters, and whether you're happy to work with that, you know, it may be the most brilliant technical person, but if you absolutely hate working with them, it's not going to be good for you. So I think more than assistant versus full professor, of course, is the stability. There's some questions around the research group as well. You know, when you start as a fresh, maybe you have your first student, your first 2 students, so that's a smaller group. The advantage is your prof will have lots of time for you. The disadvantage is you don't have so many postdocs and other more senior PhDs to bounce ideas around. But I think either is workable. Other than that, I don't know what else was there. Oh, co-advising. You have to be careful with that. Again, you should get into co-advising if your supervisor worked with that person before, your primary supervisor. If not, there are risks involved. You may end up being torn in different directions. So, you know, you need to test a little bit the waters that your co-advising team works well together. If they don't, again, it's problematic. So it can work brilliantly if, for example, you work with a primary advisor in your main area of interest, but you need some domain expertise or some application expertise, and then there's a co-advisor. But you have to set the rules from the start of how this works. You know, who drives the main research direction, what kind of interactions you have with the co-advisor. Are they there in every meeting? How do you decide where to publish? So you have to kind of have this set in the beginning, because it can get tricky. You can end up being pulled in different directions, and that's not very nice. So that's what I have for this question.
Yeah, and that's a very good point. I mean, there are benefits to co-advising. You would have more brilliant minds to work with, but it's important that those minds work well together as well, because at some point it can also sort of fall between the cracks. Like either nobody knows what you are doing, or everybody wants you to go in a different direction. So making sure, I think that was an excellent point. I won't repeat it, but it's something to keep in mind. And there is also, it depends on the institution, I guess. At some point you can also have a main advisor and other people provide advice without necessarily being official co-advisors. And that may help with some of that setting. So you still have one person who is eventually the ultimate decision maker when it comes to certain major directions, but you still get the benefit of getting feedback from other co-advisors. So there are a couple of questions on recommendation letters. So one question asks, how many students have recommendations letters from well-known professors in NLP? And then there is another question that asks whether it's okay to have letters from someone in industry. So if any of you want to take either side of the questions or both.
Sorry, so the one part of the question was, is it okay to get recommendation letters from someone from industry?
Right, and then the other, how many people who apply would have recommendation letters from well-known names? So I guess how important it is to have well-known names among your recommenders.
I think at least in my case, I've shortlisted and interviewed hundreds of people, but very few had a letter from someone famous. And to be honest, I'd care more about their research thesis and research potential, creativity, technical skills, rather than, I guess it helps, but I think it's also happened in my case that I kind of lost trust in recommendation letters, I have to say. I don't put so much weight on them anymore because people can write them themselves. Many recommendation letters don't say anything. You're kind of trying to read between the lines. So there are some really brilliant ones, but whether you can get those recommendation letters. And it also makes me think, if this person is so brilliant, why didn't the other prof recruit them in the first place? So yeah, so recommendation letters, I trust a lot more personal recommendation. If there's a researcher I trust, I work with, or I respect the work of, and if they recommend the candidate, then I really take it seriously. So it's more like word of mouth rather than what's written on a, you know, on a standard letter. But that's just me. I don't know. Maybe Rada can weigh in there, and Rui. In terms of letters from industry, why not? If you work there, if you did an internship and your manager or your host there were very happy, that would help. Again, if they can say something meaningful, you know, how did you contribute? How did you work with others? What was your work ethic? Because again, in a PhD, it's not just technical skill, it's your character and how much, you know, are you motivated? Do you take it seriously, or is it just something you're trying to do not to get a real job? So yeah, but I think letters from academia or industry help as long as they kind of fit with the rest of your application and narrative.
Yeah, I can add a few words here. So I think it is definitely helpful if you can get letters from big names, right? For example, I have recruited 2 students, and both of them have worked with some NLP researchers before that I know of. So once I know I notice the letter from those people, I will pay more attention to their applications, and then they will have higher chance. I won't, cover this. I mean, this is true for everywhere, right? So, but I also have another student who applied. He's from Bangladesh, so I don't know anyone from Bangladesh, but he also has really good letters in his undergrad institutions. So even though I don't know, their names, I still think it is really strong letter, right? So it also okay. It can also work out. So I think the idea is, even though it is not famous people, if they can write details about who you are and what you have worked on and why you're a strong applicant, it is also very valuable, right? So the content also matters. Okay, so that is a question here. Another question is whether industry letter is helpful. I think it is helpful. So I have a student who have done some research internship at Microsoft Research, and there is a letter from his mentor. I think it is also equivalently good, right? So it is really informative from those kind of people in industry lab. They are also researchers, and they can talk about your research potentials as well. If the letter can be that one, it is also very, very helpful. Yeah. So yeah, that is my my experience on those recommendation letters. Yeah.
So I'll add just a little bit. My own take is that it's better to have a letter from someone who really knows you. And I've seen letters, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but I'm this super famous professor and I have no idea who the student is, but here I am. Versus I'm somehow less famous, but let me tell you about this amazing student and what they've done. And I can tell you how they done, like maybe on a weekly basis, like really in detail about what you've been doing. And obviously the letter kind is so much more useful. So I would definitely go for that. And I think chances are they will weigh much more heavily in your application as opposed to letters from like well-known professors who maybe haven't really interacted with you very closely. I mean, obviously, if you work with those well-known professors, by all means, but otherwise, I don't think it would make a difference. So I'll go to another small cluster of questions, which ask about when to apply for a PhD. So one of them is asking whether applying for a PhD after the undergrad is the right action plan. And the other is asking whether planning for a PhD later in life, what should one do in the interim? And also as a sub-question there, whether you can do a PhD in parallel with working in an organization. So I guess the first big question would be, when is the right time to apply for a PhD? And if deciding to apply later, what would be something to do in between to maximize the chances? Zhijing, maybe if you want to start.
Okay, sounds great. So for the timing, I guess it's also like a function of multiple considerations. One top consideration is how determined you are. Like you could frame it as an investment question. You're gonna invest 5 years of your life or around that time into something, and then like how determined are you for this decision? That could be a big factor. If I've heard a lot of stories when people are just like gouging whether they fit a research, fits for whether they fit for research, is that they take a master's, try it out and see. However, I also know that some people do want to skip masters because they are already determined enough, or they don't have enough financial background to support them, let's say through a master program in the US, which is very expensive. There are also some other considerations. Like I know that in some countries, people like the culture of getting married, or like how your social, like how your community value this. Maybe most of your peers do have a job first and then do PhD. Then I think like the peer effect could also be a big thing. I would recommend maybe chatting with more peers versus plus also like if possible, talk to people at NLP conferences, know how people out of your community usually regard a PhD and the relation with part of the life. Yeah, that's some brief thoughts.
Ray, Georgiana, did you want to add anything else?
Yeah, I think based on my own experience, I directly applied for PhD after my undergrad because I was so excited about research topic. I cannot wait till after, do some jobs and come back. So my answer is there is no right time. It's really about your own timeline, right? So if you are really passionate about doing research right away, then you should start applying for PhD. But I also have some friends and line mates who came back from industry after so many years, even after they have kids to take care of, and then they come back to academia because they want to do some research and apply for PhD, right? So then this is the right decision for them. So this is their timeline. Yeah, but there is also some challenges, like you have to balance doing research or taking care of your family and so on. But if this is your choice, yeah, you should go for that as well. If you really want to do a PhD there. Yeah, so yeah, I would say there is no correct answer. It's really about your goals or your passion. Where is your passion is? Yeah, you can definitely go to industry first to find your research interest, and then come back later. So that is definitely a good plan as well. Yeah, so that is my thought on this.
Yeah, I think lots of the points have been covered already. I'd recommend at least some research exposure. If you go from undergrad straight into a PhD, it can be quite a different experience, because in undergrad everything is structured, and in a PhD you may have a bit of structure in the beginning, but then you have to kind of find your way through a lot of different alternatives and options and find those research gaps. So I think if you at least do an undergrad thesis or some sort of a small research project, at least you'll get that exposure to see how that feels. Do you find it exciting? Do you find it interesting? But I think the points are very valid. The points about what is your personal situation, financially, personally, can you afford to do a master's or not? There are lots of, in Ireland, you can go into a PhD straight after your undergraduate. Then you'll have to show a thesis or a project or something that you can, you show you have the capability to undertake a PhD. But other than that, I'm a firm believer that you learn as long as you live, and if you want to do a PhD later on in life, that's also an option. I think you bring back your project management experience from industry, which can help to keep yourself organized. I think maybe sometimes in academia we aren't as organized as we should be. So yeah, there's advantages and disadvantages. The disadvantage going into industry is it that easy to come back to the PhD and to take on that challenge of uncertainty, and the pay is lower as well. We have to face that. There's a question actually about stipends in Ireland. I think the cost of living is very high everywhere, including in Ireland, and stipends haven't kept up. So you have to consider that as well. You're actually going to take a hit on your income. I think in the long term, you can recover, but you have to consider that practical aspect as well. So yes, that's what I have.
All right, thank you. I very much agree with everything that was said, and especially Zhijing, like looking at this as an investment in your own future. I've seen arguments recently on comparing PhD salaries with sort of full-time salaries. I think that's the wrong comparison to make. I mean, obviously you want to leave, but to me, a PhD is not the time to get rich. I mean, if that's what you want, probably you would go to a high-paying job. So it's really an investment that you make in your future. Obviously, if students who are starting their PhD are really beginners in what they do, so they get the training and everything else that comes with that, and it's considered as a part-time position. So I think living reasonably well without necessarily making a fortune out of a PhD, that should be the strategy, but you will eventually get all the benefits afterwards, not only financially. I mean, PhDs are paid higher than others, but also in terms of what kind of positions you will have. I mean, you'll always be the person with a PhD in the room. You'll always go get those, okay, here's a problem, where should we look for a solution kind of situations, as opposed, here's a solution, I'll go and implement it. I'm a little sarcastic and maybe I shouldn't be, but it's really like it's life-changing in those. So just think of that as opposed to, okay, here is a job from this big company, this is how much they pay, here is a PhD, this is how much they pay, which one should I pick? I think that's the wrong comparison to make. All right, so we have time for one more set of questions, and that goes back to the application and admission process. So in the statement of purpose, there is one question that's asking whether you should list the professors that you would want to work with. So should that be targeted in the statement of purpose? And then a related question is, how are the evaluations being made? Is it only those professors that are listed who will read the application, or other people will read that as well? So any comments that you have to make on this will be helpful.
Yeah, I think I can comment on that because I have been going through several, recruiting seasons as a faculty member, so I see what's going on under the hood. I think it's really important. So two tips, right? So the first is really important to put your potential advisor name in the application system, because that when I check so many applications, I will filter out by their potential advisors' names, right? So I will filter out my name and we'll get, this number of applications just for me. So that means if you don't put your potential advisor, maybe they will not check your application at all, right? So that is really important. Or if you want to make sure your application has the attention, you should email the advisor you want to work with. So I think that is tip one. I think the second tip is you should have a website, right? So because, for me, reading website is much more easier than reading, application in PDF. I mean, at least for me, right? So a website is clickable, they are shareable, and yeah, if you can have some time to set up your website, I will strongly recommend doing that, right? So that are two tips based on my experience of, managing so many applications. Yeah.
Yeah, I think what I'd like to add is that it really depends on the program you're applying to, whether there's central recruitment or not. And if it's central recruitment, you shouldn't just list names of professors in the letter unless you talk to them, or you know, just listing half of the department. I'm not sure that would give much value. It's always useful if you contacted, or if you maybe co-design the project together, that, you know, that's more valuable than listing a bunch of names. What else was there? So what is it? Statement of purpose. What am I missing?
I think that was very, very helpful. And in general, all the answers were very helpful. I hope people here found them useful. And also, as I mentioned at the beginning, this session has been recorded and will be out there for others to hopefully find it beneficial as they prepare for their applications. You likely heard of this session either from the website or from Slack, but if you haven't, we recommend that you check out our mentorship website just to look for future sessions. Sign up on the Slack channel where these sessions are being announced. And we'll have a recording of this. I mentioned this already out there, along with some notes. Anything else to add, Zhijing, as final?
I think that's good. And in the Slack, there's an Ask Anything channel. So if you need help on PhD applications, maybe the others who are also in the Slack could help answer the question. But good luck with everyone's preparation.
Yes, good luck to everyone. And many thanks again, Georgiana and Ray and Zhijing.
Yeah, good luck to everyone. And thanks, Rada, for inviting me. So this is really delightful, you know, discussion here with Georgiana and Zhijing and so many people. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you,
everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Rada, for moderating.
Thank you, Rada.
Bye.
Bye.